also known as the Blue Sky Law. The numerical title of the law is Republic Act 8799 of 2000. So it was legislated in 2000, and technically it's not really a new law. Okay? So the Securities Regulations Code is a special law that finds application to special corporations. So let us see how special these corporations are to be covered by the law. So the important topics that we are to discuss about the law would be registration of securities, shareholders' interest, prohibition on fraud, manipulation, private tender offer, and insider trading. We will also be attempting to define what exchanges and other security trading markets are, because these are market participants that are actually covered by the SRC. Of course, we see here the government agency that is supposed to take charge of the implementation of the special law, the Securities Regulations Code, SEC. Okay. The policy, the purpose behind the legislation is that it was enacted to protect the public from unscrupulous promoters. Okay. So why protect this public? Okay, because they are left holding certificates representing nothing more than a claim to a square of the blue sky. Okay, after they have actually staked their business or venture claims. Okay, yung mga kanilang pinag-invest, okay, after having been persuaded to do so, ay wala pala palang real basis. Okay, so technically, if we are to actually simplify the purpose or the policy behind the legislation, it is really to promote protection of the investing public. Okay? So, yung blue sky is actually from jurisprudence. So, it really comes from this statement, who are then left holding certificates representing nothing more than a claim to a square of the blue sky. Moving on, some objectives of the SRC and its implementing rules and regulations. We have here to organize socially conscious and self-regulated markets, to encourage wide public ownership of business enterprises, to enhance democratization of wealth, to promote the development of the capital market. And here comes now our main concern, why SRC is actually included in your CIPAL syllabus, able to protect the investors, to ensure full and timely disclosure of material information, to minimize, if not eliminate, fraudulent or manipulative devices and practices that create distortions in a free market. Another name for the SRC is Truth in Securities Law. Okay, so why Truth in Securities Law? Because the code requires that the issuer, okay, it requires the issuer to make full and fair disclosure of information about securities being sold or offered to be sold within the Philippines, and penalizes manipulative and fraudulent acts, devices, and schemes. We see this from the enumeration a while ago of the policies behind the legislation of the SRC. Okay, so applicability of the law. Okay, it finds application to publicly held companies or public companies as defined under the law. It finds application to market participants, particularly issuers of securities and other market participants. Okay, so we really have to focus first on what are those considered as securities. Okay, securities, the definition of which is actually seen in Section 3 of SRC. Okay, so the definition of terms there in this special law is quite long. So if you wish to take a look at it, do so. So how was it defined? These are shares, participation, or interests, so SIP, in a corporation or in a commercial enterprise or profit-making venture, and evidenced by a certificate, a contract, an instrument, whether written or electronic in character. That's how it was defined. It continues actually to define securities by giving us examples of this type of securities. Okay, so what are the examples? It says under the law, shares of stocks, you have their bonds, debentures, notes, evidences of indebtedness, asset-backed securities, and these are terms which you have learned in your financial accounting, investment contracts, certificate of interest or participation in profit sharing agreements, certificate of deposit for future subscription. We also have fractional undivided interest in oil, gas, or other mineral rights, derivatives like option and warrants, and we have here certificates of assignments, certificates of participation, trust certificates, you have voting trust certificates, proprietary or non-proprietary membership certificates in corporations, and other instruments as may in the future be determined by the Commission. Okay, that's how long the definition of securities are under the law. Okay, so if we really are to actually list down, okay, and classify those that were enumerated under the law, these are the kinds of securities. It could either be an equity instrument, a debt instrument, investment instruments, derivatives, we have trust instruments, and then of course you have that catch-all provision and other instruments as may in the future be determined by the SEC. Okay? So let's review some kinds of securities which you have actually encountered in your study of financial accounting. Equity securities. Okay, shares of stocks. We've seen the definition under the revised corporation code. We have certificate of interest or certificate of participation in profit sharing agreement. Okay, certificates of deposits for a future subscription. Okay, paunang bayad. Okay, future subscription. Okay, proprietary or non-proprietary membership certificates in corporations. Okay, so what are proprietary share or proprietary certificates? Okay, the definition is they would refer to an evidence of interest, participation, or privilege in a corporation which gives the holder of the share or certificates the right to use the facilities covered by such certificate and to receive dividends or earnings from the corporation. You take a look. So, enumerated po yung mga benefits for possessing these proprietary shares or proprietary certificates. Yes, the right to use the facilities, covered also the right to receive dividends or earnings from the corporation. So technically, really, they are equity instruments. We also have this feature of proprietary share or certificate. Upon liquidation of the corporation, the holder shall have a proportionate ownership over its assets. Okay. If you take a look at the definition of proprietary share or certificate, what makes it really different from a certificate of stock? Tignan niyo pong maigi. Okay. So, may right to receive dividends. They have the right to participate in the distribution of the assets. Okay. They still, do they exercise management? So, this may actually be withheld. The reason why it's not really full. Okay. Shares of stocks. What about non-proprietary share or non-proprietary certificate? These are evidence of interest, participation, or privilege over a specific property of a corporation that allows the holder of the share or certificate to use such property, that specific property, under certain terms and conditions. Technically, it seems like it's a use of right. Okay, what was covered by the contract is the right to use, and maybe the right to the fruits, kaya use of right. The holder, however, shall not be entitled to dividends from the corporation or to its assets upon the liquidation. This will actually what? Okay, distinguish a non-proprietary share from a proprietary share. Okay. So use lang actually. That's really use of right because this will refer only to right to use. Okay, let us remember that. Debt instruments are also securities under the definition. Okay. So evidences of indebtedness, you have here bonds, debentures, you have notes, other evidences of indebtedness, asset-backed securities. Let's go through what we recall about bonds. These are issued by the government or municipal and other public corporations and by all sorts of private corporations. So they are issued by creditors to our mind. Okay. These are evidences of indebtedness in the nature of promissory notes, promising to pay a sum of money on a day certain in the future. Okay. And the units of indebtedness and regarded as, were they regarded? One entire debt. Kakautang. Okay. What else? Bonds, they are usually secured by a mortgage or pledge of the property of the issuer. So these are secured debts. What about debentures? These are issued on the general credit of the issuer, since it is not secured by any collateral. Unsecured debts, they are not funded indebtedness in the true sense, and thus would not need the approval of the stockholders of the issuing corporation. They are similar to bonds. It may be issued also by the government, public and private corporations. They are also evidences of indebtedness in the nature of promissory notes. But then again, they are unsecured. What about notes? Okay, annotation on the matter of bonds and debentures. Bonds and debentures earn interest, which must be paid by the corporation issuer, whether or not it earns profits, okay, at the stipulated period. So technically, interest is not the same as dividends. Yes, okay. It is a fixed charge with which the corporation or the issuer cannot avoid. We are referring to that interest. What about commercial papers? Okay. Long-term commercial papers, they are evidence of indebtedness, okay, of any person with a maturity of more than 365 days. It's more than 1 year. The term includes but not limited to bonds and notes. What about short-term? An evidence of indebtedness of any person with a maturity of 365 days or less. Okay. So another classification of securities under SRC will be investment instruments. Okay, so classified or included under this category will be investment contracts, which we will be attempting to dissect its definition in the subsequent slides. Okay, fractional and divided interest in oil, gas, or other mineral rights. Okay, an example of this will be customers' contract on foreign exchange trading transactions. Okay. What are commodity futures contracts, which is an example of an investment instrument? Okay, it's an agreement to buy or sell a specified quantity and grade of a commodity at a future date, okay, at a price established at the floor of the exchange. Okay, so you take a look at some keywords, it would refer to future date investments. Okay. Commodity futures contract is against public policy when where the parties did not intend actual delivery, but merely speculated on the rise and the fall of the price of the commodities. If this is the intention of the parties, that's the only time that the commodity futures contracts now becomes unlawful for being against public policy. But if you don't see that one highlighted in red, then we really have a perfectly valid commodity futures contracts considered as an investment security. Okay. About fractional and divided interest in oil, gas, or other mineral waters. Okay, what happens in this particular kind of investment? The developer would lease a certain portion of the land for the purpose of mining and operating oil and gas during a certain portion of time. And because of that lease agreement, the owner in turn receives a certain percentage of the oil and the gas produced and sold or its value at the prevailing market price. Okay. What else? The percentage is called the royalty interest, which the landowner transfers to banks as collateral for loans or sell to an oil royalty dealer and finds its way to securities market in lots of fractional and divided interest. Okay? Yung future payment niya, yung future consideration, yung kanyang inutang, okay, would refer to royalty interest. Okay? That will be a result of the fractional and divided interest in that mineral agreement. Okay. Under the Regalian Doctrine, natural resources are owned by the state. However, the state may enter into a MPSA stands for Mineral Production Sharing Agreements with Philippine nationals and FTAAs with foreign nationals. So FTAA, okay, stands for Financial and or Technical Assistance Agreements with foreign nationals. Okay, so sino po yung pwedeng parties to this particular type of investment agreements? When it involves natural resources, it can actually involve the state with Philippine nationals or with foreign nationals, and we have there the proper kind of agreement that may actually be entered into. Pwedeng MPSA, pwedeng FTAA. Okay? Derivatives is another classification of securities. Okay? It includes options, warrants. Okay, so what are derivatives? Let's review your financial accounting. They would refer to financial instruments whose value changes in response to changes in a specified interest rate, security price, commodity price, foreign exchange rate, index of prices or rates, credit rating or credit index, or similar variable or underlying factor. So really there is an underlying asset from which we take the value of these financial instruments, derivatives. Okay, so they are settled at a future date. They include but are not limited to options and warrants. Requires no initial or little net investment relative to other types of contract that have similar responses to changes in market conditions. Technically, this is why some would actually say that you can enter into securities transaction even without any capital, okay, because of this. Okay, so what are options? Okay, contracts that give the buyer the right, but not the obligation, to buy or sell an underlying security at a predetermined price, could be exercised or strike price on or before a predetermined date, called the expiry date. Okay, so let us just recall certain terms to really guide us. More often than not, okay, an MCQ on the matter of SRC would really involve definition of terms. So corollary to that would be as properly identifying terms. Yes. Okay, so options, right to buy or sell. What, when, at what price? What do we call the price? What do we call the period when the right should be exercised? Okay. So what is a put? Okay, it's a transferable option or offer to deliver a given number of shares of stocks at a stated price at any given time during a stated period. Compare put with, of course, we have here option. And so, paano mo i-relate ang put sa option? Then try to compare it with call. What about call? It's a transferable option to buy a specific number of shares at a stated price. Okay, so you take a look at some keywords: call, buy. We have here put, okay, and that is to deliver. Okay, PD, CB. What about straddle? It's a combination of put and call. Okay. So what are warrants? These are rights to subscribe or purchase new shares or existing shares in a company on or before a predetermined date called the expiry date. Okay, the right to subscribe, the right to purchase new shares or existing shares in a company. Okay, I guess you have to also refer this. Okay, these things may not have been mentioned under the corporation code, but they exist, and thanks to the SRC, they really are covered. What about convertible securities? Privilege to exchange his class of securities with another class, right to exchange, convertible. Okay. Contract will usually specify not only the security to which it may be converted, but also the ratio of conversion and the period within which the privilege may be exercised. What about stock option warrants? Okay, this would refer to options or rights to purchase stocks in the corporation at a specified price, and this is one thing that is unique to it, not lower than par, exercisable by the grantee at any time within a specified period. Okay? The benefit of having stock option warrants is that ability to be able to purchase stocks in the corporation at a price lower than, not lower than par. Okay, but exercisable. Take note, it's exercisable by the grant at any time. Okay, it should never go below par. Okay, this is usually given as incentive compensation. Okay, so additional compensation to valuable executives and employees. For valuable executives and for valuable employees, so that ability to actually negotiate the compensation package, it is actually advisable to ask for, okay, this stock option warrants. And you might encounter junior securities. What would this mean? They are type of stock into which the security is convertible. So refer it to convertible, the definition of convertible securities. Trust instruments is another classification of securities, and this will include certificates of assignments, certificates of participation, trust certificates, voting trust certificates, okay? And of course, we have here other similar certificates, okay? So yung trust certificates and voting trust certificates, these are just simply evidences of parties entering into voting trust agreements. Okay? And of course, we know that VTA is covered by the Corporation Code. Certificate of assignment evidences a transfer of rights and interests in a certain credit under Article 1624 of the Civil Code. So it has really something to do with assignment of right in the latter portion of that provision on the law on sales. Okay, so transfer of rights. So rights basically are intangible properties. It involves the transfer of both the legal and beneficial owner to the credit assigned. Okay, so the totality of the property, okay, is being transferred and po in certificate of assignment. So technically, if we are to actually compare it with the sale of property, okay, we call it purchase or sale if it involves tangible property. Okay, we have a specific name. Okay, even that sale of a property can be what, tangible or intangible, yes, but we have a specific name if what we are referring to would be intangible, okay, such as in the such as credits. The term now is really assignment. Okay, and the evidence will be certificate of assignment. What about certificate of participation? If only a portion of the credit is transferred, not total, this is evidenced by a certificate of participation, or if only the beneficial interest is transferred. Okay, so you've encountered here two kinds of interest over a certain property. Meron tayong legal title, meron tayong beneficial title. Okay, so what distinguishes a legal title from beneficial title over a certain kind of property? Legal title is something to do with name. Okay, uh, it is actually recorded in the books as you being the owner. Okay, naked title ito sinasabi. Beneficial title, on the other hand, will be okay, the owner, no, not the owner of the rights over a certain property, the owner, the ability to possess it, okay, the right to make use of it, okay, but the name remains to be the name of another person. So if what is transferred is not the totality of the credit, okay, meaning what was transferred was simply beneficial interest, so maybe the right to receive interest was the subject matter of this particular kind of agreement, then the instrument to evidence it will be what we call as certificate of participation. We have here trust certificates. When a trustor entrusts money to a trustee, and the latter, referring to the trustee, receives the money, the trustee somehow is supposed to give evidence of the receipt. And of course, that evidence, that instrument is this trust certificate. So this trust certificate, it would actually include instructions of the trustor to the trustee. Okay? Voting trust certificate, legal title passes to the trustee, but the beneficial title is retained by the trustor. This is what we know as the effects of a voting trust agreement entered into by the shareholder, maybe in favor of his trustee. Okay? So what is passed is simply the legal title so that that person can actually vote, exercise certain rights in favor of the shareholder, but the beneficial title, like the right to receive dividends, remain to be that of the trustor. Okay? So a trust indenture, it's a document where the rights of the parties are defined. It is between the debtor corporation and the trustee as the representative of all the bondholders. Minsan sinasabi, ito yung master ng bonded indebtedness. Okay? Lalo pag yung bonded indebtedness is actually issued to a group. Okay? Trust indenture. Typically, it will contain a description of the property mortgage, provisions of its care and maintenance, the payment of the taxes, the amount authorized under the issue, conversion, and redemption privileges, the conditions under which the mortgage may be released, the duties of the trustee, the conditions for default, and the remedies in case of such default. So, typical terms and conditions in the loan agreement. Yan po yan. So we also have that classification, yung casual classification of securities, other instruments as may in the future be determined by the SEC, okay? Which is something good in the way the SRC was actually uh, stated. It paves the way. It really did not, it would not make it, it's making it easy so that there's no need to really amend it every time that a new kind of investment comes in the future. Okay? Meron po coverage siya ng catch-all provision. Parang ganun. Okay? So, the function of these catch-all provision is an exercise of the SEC's residual or standby power. Okay? This power ensures that SEC has the authority to regulate the public distribution and or trading of new instruments. Okay? So, instruments that are not yet maybe imagined, okay, at the time that the SRC was actually legislated in 2000. Meron din tayong tinatawag na hybrid securities. Okay, why are they considered as hybrid? Because preferred shares and bonds are created by contract. It is possible to create stock which approximates the characteristics of debt securities. As certain characteristics of debt, maybe because it pays interest. Okay? So, meron siyang both stock and debt provision. So, this is the middle ground between, no, not the middle ground. It's a combination of 1 and 2 classification, equity plus debt. Okay? The differentiation, if a hybrid is a stock or bond, is crucial for tax purposes, however. Okay? If bond, the interest is deductible from the gross income. Okay? Deductible from the gross income of bond. If stock, the interest paid is actually dividends and are therefore not deductible. So these dividends, come to think of it, will be taxable, okay, on the hands of the recipient. But of course, the corporation being what, okay, a constituted withholding agent should rightfully, is obligated really to deduct tax, creditable tax in advance. So, tingnan maigi. Pag interest on bonds, deductible from gross income. Pag interest on stocks, dahil hybrid siya, may feature siyang hybrid, they are actually considered to be dividends. Okay. Other tests determined, okay, that particular kind of hybrid securities, is the corporation liable to pay back the investor at a fixed maturity date? What say you? Is this a kind, does this lean towards equity or does it lean towards debt? Okay. There's liability to pay back the investor, then technically it seems it's like debt equity. Interest payable unconditionally at a definite interval, or is it dependent on earnings? Okay. If payment of the interest is unconditional, then maybe it partakes of what? Debt. But if it is dependent on earnings, maybe it may now be called as equity. Does the security rank at least equally with claims of other creditors? Then debt in that sense, or is it subordinate to them? Then in this sense, it may be considered as equity. Anyway, let us now focus on certain SRC highlights. Okay, as early as now, let us emphasize the highlights so that you won't be lost in the discussion of the law. Okay, all securities for sale must be registered with the SEC. This is our general rule. Okay, so if the issuer, okay, any entity attempts to issue any of those we have just classified a while back, then it has to be registered with the SEC. SEC prohibits the sale or the distribution of unregistered securities. Okay, so register before selling, register before distributing. If you didn't register, then do not sell. If you didn't register, then do not distribute. Okay? That's simple as it is. The issuance of post-dated checks instead of stocks or traditional securities to evidence the investment of its patrons as a scheme to avoid the registration of securities is illegal and void. Because take note, the issuance of post-dated checks, okay, basically it's a promise to pay something in the future, okay, technically in exchange for investments of patrons, okay, okay, in an attempt to avoid registration, okay, that will fall now under bullet number 2. There was an there is an express prohibition under the law. The SRC exempts banks from the registration of their securities, but they are not exempt from the filing of reports required under the implementing rules of the SRC if they are publicly listed. Okay, so why are they exempted, the banks, from registration of their securities, but under the SRC, under SEC for SEC? Because then again, there is a special law that covers the registration of their securities, and this will be under the discussion of banking laws. And another government agency is concerned is actually there to regulate, supervise the implementation of the law. And we are referring to BSP, Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas. But if this bank happens to be publicly listed, we have many banks which are publicly listed, okay, they may be exempted from registration, okay, but they are not exempted from the filing of reports. What is a public company, okay, to which this law finds application? I've seen the definition already in the RCC, okay, so it actually the definition of public companies vested with public interests attempts to adopt definition of public company in the SRC. Okay, so those listed on an exchange, publicly listed company, those with assets of, okay, you take a look at the parameter, assets of at least 50 million, having 200 shareholders owning at least 100 shares each. Okay, then we have those companies that have an effective registration statement under Section 12 of the Securities Regulations Code. For bullet number 2, kindly just fix the latter portion of it, having 200 shareholders, at least 100 of them have 100 shares. Anyway, let's just go through definition of some terms that would refer to market participants. Okay, so who are these trade participants? Would refer to any broker, any dealer who has the right pursuant to the rules of exchange or any organized market to trade in that exchange or organized market. Okay, so in possession of a right to engage, okay, to trade in a particular exchange, trade participant. So to participate, there should be what? Right, and the right comes from being registered. Okay. Dealing in securities, what does this phrase mean? It includes making or offering to make with any person, or inducing or attempting to induce any person to enter into or to offer to enter into any agreement for or with a view of acquiring, disposing of, or subscribing for securities. Okay? So those are the many ways by which a market participant or a trade participant deals in securities. Who is an issuer? The issuer is the originator, the maker, the obligor, or the creator of the security. So pag obligor yan, okay, debtor po yan, no? Okay, so in exchange for getting considerations from the investing public, he has that particular obligation to actually comply with what he has promised. Okay, issuer. One authorized by the SEC to offer to sell, okay, or to sell or to promote the sale to the public of its equity. So equity investments, bonds, debt instruments, okay, investments, another form of security. Broker, on the other hand, who is a broker, a person engaged in the business of buying and selling securities for the account of others. Buying and selling securities for the account of others. That's a broker. What about the dealer? Any person who buys and sells securities for his or her own account in the ordinary course of business. If this is ordinary course of business, technically he's dealing in securities. He is a trade participant. Okay, so that is his business. Okay. Learn to distinguish broker versus a dealer, and of course, the issuer. Okay, issuer, broker, and we have here dealer. Okay. Other market participants, we also have the definition here of clearing agency. Clearing agency is any entity that provides facility for the performance of the following, okay? So the provider of facilities, okay? So that in that facility, the market participants could make deliveries of the securities and or payments in connection with transactions in securities, okay? Provide the facilities so that the market participants could reduce the number of settlements of securities transactions or allocate settlement responsibilities in accordance with SEC rules. Okay, it's also with the help of the clearing agency that the market participants now are able to provide the means for the central handling of securities so that transfers, loans, pledges, and other transactions can be made by booking entry or otherwise facilitate the settlement of securities transactions without physical delivery of security certificates. So it really would make constructive delivery of these certificates easy. So, provider of facilities, clearing agency, or trading in securities. What about an exchange? It is an organized marketplace or facility that brings together the buyers and the sellers and executes trades of securities and or commodities. And member of an exchange, any person permitted to use the facilities of an exchange without the services of a broker or payment of commission fee or payment of a reduced fee. Okay, so exchange participant or exchange user are synonymous terms. Okay. Registration of stock exchanges. Okay. No one can use the facilities of an exchange. Okay, in the Philippines, so we may be referring to the Philippine Stock Exchange unless it is registered with the SEC, unless exempted by the SEC. So the general rule, and then you have the exception to the general rule. What is the source of the exception to the general rule? The very authority that implements the special law. Trading in stock exchanges is closely supervised by the SEC. Okay? Here is a term that you should know by heart. Okay? Prospectus 2 in this sense under the SRC may be similar to prospectus under the Cooperative Code of the Philippines, with the discussion on laws of cooperatives. So what is a prospectus? Okay, a document made by or on behalf of an issuer, underwriter, or dealer to sell or offer securities for sale to the public through a registration statement filed with the Commission. So basically, it's similar to a feasibility study, okay, that is attached to that registration statement. Okay, so naka-indicate lahat doon kung ano yung features, ano yung characteristics, ng securities na binebenta, minsan pati yung profile ng company or ng market participant, okay, that deals with this securities also plays there in that document. Prospectus. Okay, prospect. Registration statement. It's an application for the registration of securities required to be filed with the Commission. Okay? So ano ang kaparehas nito sa usaping Corporation Code of the Philippines maybe? Okay? So it may be similar to maybe yung ating articles of incorporation. Yes? Registration statement. In addition to the articles of incorporation, because this particular corporation deals with securities. So, yung documentation na kailangan i-submit minsan sa SEC, humahaba, okay, pag ang isang korporasyon ay nagiging special. Okay? Uncertificated security. What does it mean? So, the functional term there is uncertificated. What makes it uncertificated? Okay, it's a security that is evidenced by electronic or similar records, not the traditional certificate that we know of na paper. So, ito paperless. Okay, who is an underwriter, another market participant? A person who guarantees on a firm commitment and or a declared best effort basis the distribution and the sale of securities of any kind by another company. Okay, so you have seen also the definition of underwriter under the revised corporation code. Similar in context, no? They guarantee on a firm commitment. The reason why they actually receive, okay, a higher commission because of this guarantee. Kasi may kaakibat din na malaking loss pag hindi po natupad yung guarantee niyan. They will be the one to really paying it off because they promised to do so. Okay, underwriter. What about investment contracts? So investment contracts, investment instruments, special classification of securities. An investment contract means, take a look, it may actually refer to a contract, it may refer to a transaction, it may refer to a scheme. Okay, scheme, manner, okay, whereby a person invests money in a common enterprise. What is invested? Take note that it may not really be limited only to money. It may be some other kind of property then, other than money, but the investment is done in a common enterprise. He is led to expect profits primarily from the efforts of others. This is what we call as the Howie test now. Okay, because significantly before the definition was limited to number 2 read is led to expect profit solely from the efforts of others. Ngayon primarily okay na. Okay. So what is the presumption established? Assumption that a contract is an investment contract whenever we see those things mentioned in the previous slide. Okay, the presumption is that it exists, an investment contract exists whenever the person seeks to use the money of others on the promise of profits. So be careful, okay, with the contracts that you enter into. When you make use of the money of another person on the promise that that person who gave you the money will earn profits, there's here a rebuttable presumption that an investment contract is entered into. Remember that an investment contract is a kind of security. Okay, before having entered into such, okay, basically, okay, registration should have been done of this kind of security. Let me just pause. Okay, so investment contracts, these would refer to certificates of interest or partnership in a profit sharing agreement or certificates of deposit for future subscription. Okay, under an SEC opinion of 2011, contract, transaction, or scheme whereby a person invests money in a common enterprise and is led to expect profits primarily from the efforts of others. The definition was actually adopted by the SEC in this opinion in 2011, as early as 2011. So, what are the requisites of an investment contract? Let us just enumerate them. Okay, an investment of money. Again, money may now be property in a common enterprise with the expectation of profits, primarily from the efforts of others. And then again, you see there how it tests, which I mentioned a while back. When is it considered to be a common enterprise? This is referring to the second element here. Okay. A common enterprise is deemed to exist or it's deemed created when two or more investors pool their resources, creating a common enterprise, even if the promoter receives nothing more than a broker's commission. The characteristic that would make it common would be the number of investors, okay? Two or more investors, and then you take a look at the purpose of the receipt of that money from these investors. pool, okay, pooling of resources. Okay. From SEC bulletins and advisories, we actually can glean examples of security, some examples of security. So we have here, under a memorandum of agreement entered into between DTI and the SEC on August 28 of 2002, to stop the proliferation of pyramiding schemes and unregistered investment contracts. Okay, it mentioned there that timeshares fall within the definition of securities, future enjoyment of certain privileges. So investment contract, okay, timeshares. We also have in 2018, okay, an SEC bulletin or advisory of the SEC in April of 2018 talked about cryptocurrencies. Okay, so internet-based Bitcoin and cryptocurrency Ponzi schemes. This was the topic of that particular advisory. The SEC said then that while it has not yet issued guidelines on cryptocurrencies, it still has jurisdiction over these because they fit the description of securities under the SRC. To think of it, okay, even though you say that you may actually argue that it may not fall under the definition of the third classification investment contract, but we have there the provision of number 6, catch-all provision, okay, as an exercise of the residual power of the SEC. Come to think of it, we don't have cryptocurrencies during that time, 2000, okay, when the law was actually legislated. Okay. The agency warned the public against investing in cloud mining contracts, which supposedly offer investors returns in exchange for the lease of cryptocurrency mining tools. Okay? So covered po yan jurisdiction ng SEC. We have here a problem. Are certificates of membership in a country club that gives the member the right to use all club facilities, the same being transferable, so transferable rights to make use of these, but does not give him any right to the income or assets of the club considered securities. Okay, from the readings of the examples of instruments a while back, definitely your answer to this will be, okay, after again referring into the definition of securities, which you are now aware of, okay, yes, they are, because proprietary or non-proprietary membership certificates and similar contracts and investments where there is no tangible return on investments plus profits, but an appreciation of capital as well as enjoyment of particular privileges and services may actually be considered as security. Okay? Dahil securities yan, then again, checklist natin, we should make sure that before the issuer of the security engage in such kind of sale, okay, that security itself is registered before the SEC. Such being the case, said membership certificates cannot be sold without complying with the requirements of then, okay, we have the Revised Securities Act. Okay. This is the legislation prior to the Securities Regulations Code. Here is a problem. X has a certificate of membership in an exclusive club that gives all members therein the right to use club facilities. The certificate is transferable, but it does not give X any right to the income or assets of the club. Okay, similar to the problem we have a while back. Is the certificate security? Yes, the certificates are securities because, again, proprietary, non-proprietary membership certificates are securities that cannot be sold, SOLD, without registration with the SEC. Okay? You might have heard about this term, Ponzi scheme. What is a Ponzi scheme? It's an investment program that offers impossibly high returns and pays, okay, nanalaki, these returns to clearly investors out of the capital contributed by later. Pays these returns to early investors out of the capital contributed by later investors. And yung source po nung supposed to be a consideration na ibabalik sa mga naunang investor. Okay, it's from actually the investment of later investors. Ponzi scheme. Scheme generally falls apart when the operator flees with all the proceeds or when a sufficient number of new investors cannot be found to allow the continued payment of dividends. Okay? So naputol yung chain. So wala nang panggagalingan yung pambayad po sa mga naunang investors. The Ponzi scheme. The pyramid scheme was the definition. A marketing and investing fraud in which an individual is offered a distributorship or franchise to market a particular product. The real profit is earned not by the sale of the product, but by the sale of new distributorships. Again, primarily the source of the profit is from the efforts of others. Still, pyramid scheme po yan. The profits of the person employing such a plan are derived primarily from the recruitment of other persons into the plan rather than from the sale of consumer products, services, and credit. Okay, so we have now the next question, okay, is an illustration of securities fraud. Okay, and the SEC coming into the picture to actually do its role under the law, which is the protection of the investing public. So investigation should commence right away in order to immediately address the proliferation of alleged related incidents. Okay, so technically the function here would be for the SEC to now initiate the filing of estafa or syndicated estafa cases, okay, versus the proponents of, in this particular slide, Ammon Futures. There was filing of an SEC administrative case. This may actually be different from the filing of the criminal case. But pa yung criminal case, may administrative case, then the SEC issued a CDO or a cease and desist order against the proponents, of course, of that Ammon Future so that they will not engage in any activities. Okay? And add to that will be revocation of the business registration. Okay? So marami po tayo dito remedies na pwedeng gawin. So what happened in Ammon Futures? It was 244 million worth of Ponzi scheme in Pagadian City. The incorporators and the officers of Ammon Futures solicited investments by promising this much of return. The rate of return is from 15% to 40% in just a matter of 20 to 30 days for investments that were to be made in a Malaysian company engaged in commodity trading futures, such as their manganese, palm oil, and nickel. The supposed investment returns was not sustained. Pyramid scheme, wala nang pumasok. The business collapsed. Okay? From the start, illegal siya because there was no registration of that particular security. Okay? So, still from SEC bulletins and advisories, okay, has that function also to come out with investors education and information. Okay? So, yung may campaign po sila, i-inform yung investing public, okay, so that it could avoid, the public could avoid being made fools of themselves. 4 signs of an investment scams: the rush to invest now, the use of jargon to discuss the complex product, the high return for zero to low risk, and the lack of registration or license. If you see these things, okay, beware, okay, because that investment really may actually be a scam. Okay? So, kung meron tayong takeaway sa discussion ng SRC, ito po, pinaka-importante. This thing you can actually make use of in your life, okay? Even beyond, okay, yung preparation po ninyo sa SIPALE. So, the 4 signs of an investment scam: minamadali kayo to invest now kasi sayang daw yung opportunity. If you don't invest now, then they would actually complicate the agreement by making use of jargon to sound technically savvy, okay, financially savvy at that. They promise you high returns, who would not like high returns for zero to low risk at all, and the lack of registration. Okay? If I were you, ask right away for registration. Kung walang registration, nung kumpanya, walang registration yung securities, then do not deal with them. Okay, what does the SRC, how does the SRC protect the public who wishes to invest in securities? Okay, the law requires full disclosure of information to the public regarding the securities that are being offered and the issuers, including the filing of and approval of the registration statement and approval of prospectus. So it would actually refer to compliance with SEC procedures on the matter of registration of securities, registration of market participants. There is a close monitoring of securities and other circumstances that may affect same as well as persons involved in order to ensure, again, compliance with laws. Hindi lang siya sa simula, sa registration. Okay? Compliance. May mga periodic reports po, may mga annual reports. Okay? Prohibiting and penalizing different fraudulent practices and transactions. We will see some of these fraudulent transactions or fraudulent manipulative devices later on, later in the discussion of the presentation. And providing the SEC with powers and functions. So these are the ways that the SRC attempts to protect the right of the investing public. So we have here section 8.1 of the SRC. It requires the filing with and approval by the SEC of the registration statement. Okay. So what is the consequence of non-registration of securities? If a registration statement is not filed, the following are prohibited. Sale of the securities in the Philippines, the offer to sell, okay, distribution of securities within the Philippines, disseminate of information relating to an offering of securities. Technically, we have this principle in law. Okay, when we talk about the application of laws in the Philippines, that they are restricted by the territory of the country. So, mga prohibition po dito rightfully would find application in the Philippines. Okay, territorial in application. You have here a question. Let me take a look at it. What are the legal consequences of failure to register securities with the SEC before they are offered for sale or distribution to the public? Okay, again, the seller and or the issuer will be criminally liable. So there's criminal liability. Upon conviction, a fine of 50,000 to 5 million is imposable and or imprisonment of 7 to 21 years at the discretion of the court. The purchaser can recover from the seller the amount paid with interest thereon, less the amount of any income received on the purchased securities. Okay, or damages if the purchaser no longer owns the securities, and the SEC may actually also issue a cease and desist order. Okay, ito po yung repercussions. And many more. Okay, these are just some consequences of engaging in that activity, failing to register securities. What is a public offering? Any offering of securities to the public or to anyone, whether solicited or unsolicited, and usually with the intervention of an investment bank. So, sino po yung target buyers, okay, that would actually characterize the kind of offering that you have. Is it public? Is it private? Okay, to whom was it offered? Take a look at this. Is different from mine. What are the instances when a solicitation or presentation of securities for sale is